On 11.3, just so that you guys know what we're going to talk about, is we're going to talk about sampling methods. Like, how do you get a sample of things? Okay, a lot of times when they say stuff out loud, some of the things that, they talk about, like 4 to 5 dentists prefer Trident gum over anything else, or toothpaste or whatever like that. Okay, how did they test that? How did they sample that? That's what you're going to look at today. So first thing that we're going to go through is the types of samples that you have. The first samples are what we call self-selected. Okay, the first sampling method is self-selected, and what that is that the population can volunteer to be in the sample. So if you volunteer to be in the sample, you have self-selected to do it. Okay? So if they ask you to do something, or ask for volunteers, and have you ever been in that situation where you've been asked, does anybody want to volunteer to do this? Okay, that is a self-selected sample. Okay, you chose to do it. Okay, the next type, systematic. Now, a systematic sample has a rule. It's something like every 4th person is chosen. Okay, systematic. So if it has a rule behind it, like every 3rd person, or every person has a letter A in their name, or something like that. Okay, so just so that you guys are aware of it, systematic would be if it has a rule, or it has a method, like a formula for finding out who's going to get picked for this survey, or this thing. The next one, stratified. What a stratified sample is it's a population is divided into smaller groups. Okay, then it's randomly selected from that group. So for instance, you guys are in a stratified situation in this classroom. And I have you in groups of, it's supposed to be 3 or 4, but with this particular part, what I've done is I've grouped you into smaller groups, and then from there you get randomly chosen. So like when I give you a thing to do either on the iPad or whatever, if I ask you guys to do a question for me, how am I doing that? Well, I've put you in groups already, or you guys sat there, because remember there's no assigned seats. So you guys sat in these groups, and then from there the calculator's randomly generating a number for me. That's stratified, because then I'm randomly selecting one of you guys out of a smaller group. Okay? That's what that means. So first of all, you put it into smaller groups, and then you randomly choose it. The next one is called the cluster sample. And for their cluster sample, it's divided into groups, which is what, again, we are like in here. All of the members in one or more of the clusters are selected. So that would mean where if I were to put you into a smaller group, like for instance, if I were to survey something for the entire school, and I just surveyed you guys, that would be an example of a cluster, because it's just you guys and not the rest of the school. And then I surveyed everybody in it. Okay? A little bit different than stratified. Notice the difference. Stratified, we still put you in groups, and then I randomly select people from the group. Not necessarily everybody, whereas cluster would be everybody. So there's the difference between those two. And the last one, that's as far as the different sampling method, is called convenient sample. What do you think this is going to entail? What do you think a convenient sample would be? Easiest. There you go. It's the easiest way of doing it. Okay, so for me, when I got my master's degree, one of the things I had to do is I wanted to test a certain thing. I used my classes for that. That was convenient to me because they were at my disposal. Whereas I didn't have to send out surveys. Like if I were to go back and get my PhD, I would have to send out surveys across, I don't know, the state or whatever to get feedback. Okay, then it's not as convenient for me. I just send it out there and hopefully I get enough responses. Whereas when I did my master's, when I just used my classrooms, those were convenient to me. Okay, so that's what a convenient sample is. It's easy to reach. Okay, so what you're going to be given is you're going to be given a scenario, and they're going to ask you what type of sample is this? Is it self-selected where they voluntarily did it? Was it systematic, meaning that every fifth person did it? Was it stratified, put into groups, and then randomly chosen? Was it a cluster where it was put into groups, then everybody was done? Or was it convenient to the person giving the survey? That's what it's going to ask you to do. You have to choose which one of those you think it is. So, for this particular thing, it says you want to determine whether the students in your school like the new design of the school website. Identify the sample described. You list all students alphabetically and choose every sixth student. That would be systematic because we have a rule. Good job. You mail questionnaires and use only the questionnaires that are returned. Would not be convenience. And it's not a cluster because you didn't organize them into groups first. That's self-selected because they are the ones who returned it. They voluntarily returned the survey to you. Okay, I've gotten that before for me. I've done a thing where, have you ever heard of the Nielsen ratings? It's what TV is based on, who watches what and whatever else. I've actually done that twice. I don't know how I was selected, but they sent me a thing and said, would you please be willing to do this, along with a $20 bill to help me persuade me to do it. So I did. Why not? Okay? A lot of ESPN and NHL Network, but that's what it is in our house. So that's one of those things where I was self-selected because I volunteered to do it. And then I returned it after that. You ask all the students in your algebra class. Maybe. Or a cluster. Okay, I'd probably take either one because you're conveniently using your algebra class, like if you were to sample everything in here, but you're also using a cluster because you've organized it into a smaller group, and the key to it is all students in your algebra class. So you didn't randomly select students from there. So I would actually take either one for that. Multiple answers. Good job. You randomly select 2 students from each classroom. What do you think? That would be stratified. Why? It's randomly selected, and if it's from each classroom, then students are organized into groups. Okay? So do you see where the difference is or what you have to do for the first one? Okay, good. Then, after that, what they're going to ask you to do is they're going to define this term. Bias. Okay? So what I want you to do, take 30 seconds, talk in your groups, and I want you guys to define bias to each other. When you hear the word bias, what does it mean? Okay, so I heard you a lot of different discussion. Anyway, Linz, what'd you guys say?
Oh, you already had your opinions set on the topic before you heard the other side, so you're biased about it.
Okay, so that you already have it made up that hockey is the best sport in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm biased towards that. All right. Here's how they define it, just so that you guys know. It's an error that results in misrepresentation of a population. So if I'm biased towards something, does that mean that I'm going to say, maybe if I'm the one that they select, then I'm going to be the one that says that this is the best thing ever, and then that's what they think the whole population does? Okay, it's a misrepresentation of the population. Now, what you're going to have to figure out is you're going to have to figure out if it's unbiased or biased. Okay, and again, an unbiased is a representative of the population that you want to inform about, and a sample that overrepresents or underrepresents a part of the population is biased. Okay? So unbiased is a representative of the population, whereas biased would be either one way or the other. It's not in the middle. Okay? So they're going to give you another scenario and ask you to think, is this biased or unbiased? So here's what it has. A news organization asks its viewers to participate in an online poll about bullying. Okay? So is that biased or unbiased?
Unbiased.
Why?
Because it's just asking the viewers for feedback. It's not.
Okay?
It'd be unbiased because it's asking for your opinion whether it is or isn't.
Yeah.
Because a misrepresentation would be like, overall, it would say, like, bullying's a bad thing without asking people their opinion.
Okay? Now here's the flip side. If I watch that program, do I believe in what they say?
Yes.
So what if they tell me the wrong thing, but I just believe it?
Then it's a bias.
Then that would be biased. So you have two sides of it. So what's going to happen is, for this particular thing, you're going to have to pick which side you're on and then defend it. Like, you guys did great defending your saying it was unbiased, and that's fine. But you can't just pick one and say, this is it. You're going to have to tell me why. Okay? Why do you feel that way? All right? Your opinion. This is the nice thing about this assignment is we can have multiple answers. Okay? We can have different answers, and that's okay. That's why we're all different in the world. But you guys are going to have to pick one and then tell me why you think it's that. Okay, how about this one? A computer science teacher wants to know how many students at a school most often access the internet. The teacher asks students in one of the computer science classes. So would this be biased or unbiased?
Biased.
Why?
Because it's only one class out of.
Well, that's not necessarily the bias part. That's only one class is maybe a convenient sample, right?
But they use computers for that class.
But they use computers for that class? Okay. But again, the question said, when do they most often access the internet? Might be because it's biased because they might be accessing it every time in that class. That's it. Doubt it with today's cell phones. Okay, but what do you think? Okay, that's what you're going to have to answer. You're going to have to tell me a little bit of why. It's not going to be a big writing assignment. Just, if you think it's biased, then why? Just write biased because, and then just a little short why you think it's biased. Okay, it doesn't have to be like a full-on essay. All right, it just has to be one little sentence about why you think it's this or that. How do you feel? So far, so good? Okay. The next terms that we have. We have experiment, observational study, survey, and simulation. Okay. Now, what these things are these are ways or methods of collecting data. Okay, so you know what data is. It's not always numbers. It could be anything. But data itself, this is ways we can collect it. We can run an experiment. We can have an observational study. We can conduct surveys. Or we can actually simulate what's going on. Anybody want to offer, self-selected, anybody want to volunteer to tell me what they think an experiment is? Like a medical trial? Okay. A lot of times they do drug trials where they do stuff where they have an experimental drug out there that they want to try to see if it's ready for the masses. Have you ever heard of that in the news before?
Yep.
Yeah, all the time. Okay, they say it imposes a treatment on individuals in order to collect data on their response to the treatment. So very similar to what we call the drug trials. The treatment may be a medical treatment or can be any action that might affect variable in the experiment, such as adding methanol to gas and then measuring its effect on fuel efficiency. So it doesn't always have to be medical. It could be anything, any type of experiment that you want to try to run to see if it happens. Science class, we do this a ton. Okay. Observational study. What do you think an observational study is?
Putting somebody in the room and seeing how they react to different,
Have you ever seen that or been a part of it?
you know.
No? Okay, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll put stuff in. Have you ever seen those things that have like, they look like a mirror, but really it's a window?
Yep.
Okay, in movies or whatnot, or behind that board, where they can watch and you have no idea. Okay, like an NCIS, right? Okay, but what they're doing is they're observing individuals and measures variables without controlling the individuals or their environment. This type of study used when it's difficult to control or isolate the variable being studied, or when it may be unethical to subject people to a certain treatment or to withhold it from them. Okay, so again, if I observe stuff, the power of observation is huge in this one. It's just me observing, and if I were to study something on you guys, and I observe that this is happening all the time, that's kind of one of those things. A survey. What do you think a survey is?
Self-reporting.
Okay, self-reporting, you ask people. In one of the English classes downstairs right now, they are doing this. They're asking people to, they wrote a survey to see whatever was. Okay, one of the students in my 4th hour class was actually doing that, where she had a QR code and she asked people to do that. Okay, a lot of times those are self-selected things. For instance, if I were to go back to get my PhD in something, I would probably have to conduct a survey, which means I would send it out to the masses and hope for whatever in return. Okay, and a simulation. What do you think a simulation is?
Repeating something that's happened or you want to have happen.
Okay, uses a model to reproduce the conditions of a situation or process so that the simulated outcomes closely match the real world outcomes. So if I were to simulate what would happen using this particular device in here, it should match the real world stuff out there. So again, they're going to give you a scenario and ask you what type of data collecting methods would you use. A researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer. What type of data collection would I be doing if I were a researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer? That's probably observational, right? Like I'd be just sitting in the side, just watching the hand sanitizer going, oh, they used it. Or they didn't. Oh, you know? I don't know that you could simulate that. I don't think that you would experiment with that. And I don't think you'd survey people. I think an observational study would be the most appropriate. A landscaper fertilizes 20 lawns with regular fertilized mix and 20 lawns with new organic fertilizer. The landscaper then compares the lawns after 10 weeks and determines which fertilizer is better.
Experiment.
I would probably call that an experiment too. Okay? So that's what they're going to ask you to do for that part of it. And again, the last thing that might be in there is, again, it's talking about biased questions. Okay, and it says when designing a survey, it's important to word the survey questions so they do not lead to biased results. Answers to poorly worded questions may not accurately reflect opinions or actions of those being surveyed. Questions that are flawed in a way that leads to inaccurate results are called biased questions. Avoid questions that encourage a particular response, are too sensitive to answer truthfully, do not provide enough information to give an accurate opinion, or address more than one issue. Okay, those are things that are biased. So what they're going to have you do is they're going to give you an example and you have to describe how you would correct it. Okay? So it'll say something like this. A dentist surveys his patients by asking, do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? Explain why the question might be biased, or otherwise introduce bias into the survey, and describe a way to correct the flaw. So how do you change that to make it better?
Well, you're not going to tell your dentist you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to change it. Who in their right mind would tell their dentist, no, I don't brush at all?
You have to have
Okay.
someone else ask.
I mean, they smell your breath when you go in there.
Right, they do. right? They know. You can't lie to them because they know. Proof is in your teeth. Once they look at them, they'll go, yeah, right, you don't do any of this. Okay? So they know. So that could be a bias because you're automatically forced to answer one way or the other. You feel pressured, right? Okay, so how do you make it better?
And you recommend that you brush your teeth and floss.
Or not have your dentist ask you that.
Who else would ask you that when you go to the dental office then? Maybe the secretary, maybe the hygienist, who's the one who cleans it.
Yeah, or have you
Okay.
actually fill out a survey?
Good. Here's what they wrote for the answer for that. Patients who brush less than twice per day or do not floss daily may be afraid to admit this because their dentist is asking this question. Isn't that what you guys said too? One improvement may be to have patients answer about dental hygiene on paper, then put paper anonymously into a box. Okay? And I'm sure that when Miss Pickard is cleaning teeth at Dakota Dentistry, right? Search Valley. Dental. Okay? When Lauren's mom is cleaning your teeth, okay, you're going to feel more pressured when they ask you a question to answer it truthfully as compared to anonymously. That might be better so it's not as biased. If they have a suggestion box or something you could put it in. But again, they're just going to ask you, what do you think? How is it flawed? Which you guys answered great. And then give them a suggestion for changing it. So, again, a lot of it is going to be based on your opinion. What you think. How do you feel about the question? I can't answer that for you. You have to give me some reasoning as far as why. Okay? So, starting on page 614 to 615, we're not 3. 6 to 33, multiples of 3. So again, you start with 6, then you go to 9, 12, and so on. Now, on number 6, it just says identify the type of sample described. So, is it self-selected? Is it systematic? Is it cluster? Is it? You tell me what you think. Then on number 12, it says identify the type of sample and explain why it might be biased. So you got to pick the sample. Again, that's like the cluster and the stratified and whatever. And then why it might be biased. On 15 and 18, determine whether the sample is biased. And then why or why not. On 21 and 24, identify the method of data collection for the situation describes. Is it a simulation? Is it an experiment? What do you think? 27, explain why the survey questions may be biased or otherwise introduce bias into the survey and tell them how to describe how to change it. And again, same thing for 30 and then also 33, explain why they might be valid or invalid, which is again, you're biased or unbiased. Okay?